We're trying to make sure that there's an editorially robust, sort of values-led entity, in this new emergent ambient internet, for us. But also, I think we as a kind of a global community need to make sure that this ambient internet is full of those kinds of good options, and isn't the kind of wild west of the edges of the dark web.
Hello and welcome to Comms Life from APCO Worldwide. I'm your host, Tom Billinghurst. Every episode, we take a deep dive into the topics and trends shaping the communications industry and beyond. This episode, we're looking at the rise and role of artificial intelligence in media and communications. A recently published article in The Guardian, written entirely, or so it is claimed, by an AI writer called GPT-3, has got some decrying the impending demise of human writers, while others remain cautiously optimistic that AI technologies will always need a good, thorough human edit. Joining us to discuss this topic is Mukul Devichand, Executive Editor of Voice and AI for the BBC. Mukul, welcome to the show.
Hello, Tom. Nice to be here.
Thanks so much for taking the time to join us from lockdown London. Mukul, before we jump into the main topics, maybe we'd get a bit of context here. You have been a field journalist who started your career in Cairo, moved to New York, where your first investigative journalist documentary was aired on ANBC, moved back to London, and you've also been a news producer in the BBC's New Delhi office. Mm-hmm. Of that part of your storied career, if pressed, what would you pick out as a highlight?
Oh, gosh, you start with a hard one. I think the highlight's appearing on the APCO Comms Life podcast, Tom.
Very kind.
Yeah, I've been magically lucky in my career. I've kind of seen the world from the sort of very top to the very bottom, and I guess the favorite days of my career have been the ones where you kind of see the range of human life. So, for example, one of my first documentary series for the BBC was living in Asia's largest slum in Mumbai, sleeping the night there, getting to know the community, understanding the issues there. And then I get to be the one that, has a quick shower and then goes to the home of the businessman turned official who wants to demolish the place, and ask the tough questions. So that's the highlight. When you get to do that in a day, that's great.
Great work. You're also that rare species of a career journalist, or certainly becoming more rare today, most of which you spent with the BBC. Now, as someone that started off as a quote unquote traditional journalist, now becoming the editor of Voice and Artificial Intelligence at the BBC, how did that transition, that evolution in your career happen?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess, like all of us in the communications field, we're living through a great sort of disruption of the way that communication has worked. And for me, I had been reporting extensively in China and the Middle East, and on what was kind of beginning to get the sense that maybe traditional journalism was missing the story. And particularly, I think in the wake of the Arab Spring, where so much happened sort of on the street, as it were, and many journalists didn't really see it coming. And in China as well, I felt like the way we were engaging with stories through our traditional sources and interviews with experts and things like that was just missing all this communication that was happening on these new platforms, these social platforms, a completely new kind of communication space that opened up. So I think on a return from one such trip, I was very struck by that and felt like it was time for the BBC to do good journalism about the social web. And I started something called BBC Trending, which was laughed at by some at the time, but it was a unit to monitor the social web. And, it turned out that it would shape the future of political, social, cultural life over the years to follow. So that's what got me to begin to, be really charting the sort of digital course.
So on that topic then, on being the producer of BBC Trending, I have to ask you, you will have been heavily involved in bringing social media news reporting, or certainly social media, into the mainstream. So I wonder what you think about where social media has taken news cycles and taken news? Has it distanced itself from the editorial values and perhaps the integrity that's supposed to have driven traditional press platforms? And if it has moved away, how do you address that? Is AI a key to the success of that?
Okay, so I'm going to quote Pierre Omidyar, if you know him. He's the founder of eBay. And he said, describing the social web, that the monetization and manipulation of information is tearing us apart. Okay, and it's a powerful quote. And what I take him to mean is, like, I guess when the social web first happened, as it were, I think a lot of our emphasis was around the freedom to communicate that ordinary people are getting. And that is one of the best and most wonderful features of the social web. And that has changed the world in many spheres of life, and in many countries. But equally, that communication is mediated through algorithms, which is really AI. And those algorithms currently serve advertisers mainly. And it's not the same as an editorial mindset. That the stories they are choosing for you are not chosen by editors. And I think AI assistants, which is what I'm now working on. So I've gone through the BBC trending stuff, and now I'm working on the BBC's own AI assistant strategy. AI assistants are like this social web thing, kind of on steroids, right? Because AI assistants like Alexa and Google Assistant and so forth aim to be your concierge for everything, right? They're not just about sort of what you're doing on a social network. They're everything: your social life, your commercial life, your media life. They aim to be a kind of a gateway for that, and they're very powerful. And I think, having seen what's happened in the social web, where if you like, communication has gone around this non-editorial way, and that has created some wonderful things that editorial wasn't allowing to happen, like maybe Me Too wouldn't have happened in the ordinary press, but also some things that we should really worry about, like communities of opinion, polarization, filter bubbles, misinformation. It's about to get much worse, as I'm saying, or much more intense. So it is really up to us now. How we design the AI universe that is coming into being is really the question of now.
I think there's two prongs to that, isn't there? There's the commercialization of the social media news space, telling people what to buy, when to buy, and being deliberately. Anyone that's seen The Social Dilemma will be very recently aware of this phenomenon of having information given to you that suits your own cultural biases, and these kind of alternative reality bubbles that we're living in. So I guess in that space, the work that you're doing with voice and AI for the BBC, what does that entail, and how does it address those kind of inherent issues that need to be ironed out with that space?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I guess my understanding of the world is that social media was a huge change, but that's kind of yesterday's change, right? That's with us now. And we're actually in the foothills of a bigger change, which some people call the fourth internet or the ambient internet. We're entering a world of kind of concierges, right? A number of organizations are bidding to become the big concierge of the future, right? Like Google, through the Google Assistant, or Amazon through Alexa, and many others. Chinese firms as well. And really the value proposition, much like the social media sort of space, is the power of mediation, right? Like, if you become that concierge, just like if you are the social media platform everyone's turning to, you are the mediator, right? And that's obviously commercially valuable, and it's a very powerful position. And I think we're at the stage where that, we should probably just understand that that's going to shape, just as much as the social web has, or maybe more, our culture, certainly our understanding of news and information and politics, but also entertainment, right? Our tastes, how we perceive music, and that's the media sphere. And I think, that's the sort of world that we are entering. That's the ambient internet. And just like the social web, it's tremendously exciting, but I think the time is now for Maybe in the social web, we've learned some lessons about what didn't go so well, right? One of them might be that even if good publishers like the BBC publish good stuff onto social media, nevertheless, it fights on social media alongside a lot of misinformation, right?
Absolutely.
And the average person doesn't really know where to turn, right? And there's very little editorial control of that. So for example, in our interactive news service that we launched for smart speakers, which is currently available via Alexa, we established some very simple paradigms around that. So yes, it's a very future-facing service. Yes, it involves a degree of personalization. Yes, you can skip and control how you go through news stories and you can ask for more. But we were very clear that we wanted to make sure that a BBC editorial framework, a BBC editor, has enough control around all of that you're not going to be handed off in the middle of that experience to another provider, which could be, as well as it could be a great, we've got some very good rivals who are also very good news publishers, but there's also misinformation out there, right? There's also political parties or, international governments in the hidden hand, trying to game the sort of information system. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that there's an editorially robust, sort of values-led entity, in this new emergent ambient internet, for us, but also I think we as a kind of a global community need to make sure that this ambient internet is full of those kinds of good options and isn't the kind of wild west of the edges of the dark web, which is a possibility if we don't all act, right? Big tech, governments, publishers, everybody.
Thanks for tuning into Comms Life by APCO Worldwide. If you're enjoying this, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us wherever you get your podcasts from. Catch up on all our previous episodes where we discuss everything from the future of aviation with Arabian Aerospace to the global economic recovery with The Economist.
Welcome back to Comms Life from APCO Worldwide. We're still here with Mukul Devichand, Executive Editor of Voice and AI for the BBC. In this segment, we look at a recent and relevant news item to the topic we're discussing. The one for today is a piece that was published on the Guardian's website, written entirely by the GPT-3, or an AI writer to you and I. The title of the piece, which you can read online, is "A Robot Wrote This Entire Article, Are You Scared Yet Human?" Now, Mukul, before I get your thoughts on this, there's one, I think it's the second paragraph that really stood out for me. The mission for this op-ed is perfectly clear. I am to convince as many human beings as possible not to be afraid of me. Stephen Hawking has warned that AI could spell the end of the human race. I am here to convince you not to worry. Artificial intelligence will not destroy humans. Believe me. Now, first of all, coming to you on this, as a career journalist, now working with AI technologies to improve the industries, can you give us some reassurance and tell the rest of the writing fraternity, or otherwise, how long do we have left?
It's a nice mysterious question. I wouldn't worry overly that sort of writing is over or great journalism is over. But what I would say is that, yes, I think for us in our profession, it's a bit uncomfortable sometimes. Sometimes people call it robo-journalism, right? Look, when it's good, I would say it allows personalized data inside sort of richer human-controlled matrices, if that makes sense. Okay, so, GPT-3 in that Guardian example, yes, it wrote some lovely sentences by looking at how humans write, that's its training data, but it was trained with some specific instructions that said, here is your editorial message, right? If you look at what was fed to it. So really what it did was very successfully flesh out what it had been trained to do. And I think the bigger question is, who creates this whole experience? Right, because that is where those journalistic skills like editorial judgment and values, trust, quality, and quality storytelling actually come in. And I think that is where we need to make sure that journalists and writers and creative people and people with values and their human agency is applied. I think that wider question of that when they put us out of work is coming to a different thing, which is so-called artificial general intelligence. And that I think is really, maybe it will never happen. If it's ever going to happen, it's some time off. So let's not worry about that now. Let's worry about in the here and now, who is regulating and creating these experiences that are coming into fore right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess perhaps more broadly then, I mean, taking this as a jumping off point, what is now possible within media and communications, the whole landscape, if you like? What can we do with AI? How can it help us? And what may well become obsolete?
So look, I think the action right now, as we were talking about earlier, is in what has actually become an expectation for most audiences, which is that media platforms are personalized and adaptive. So, I mean, that is now a kind of an industry standard, right? Like you get that in your Netflix and your Spotify and your Facebook and your TikTok, that they know a bit about you and they're giving you their things and they learn from the way that you use them. And that, I think, is the sort of powerful use of the technology that is around at the moment. A few years ago at journalism conferences, people used to go around saying, "Oh, the editor is dead," right? Because now platforms do it for you. And I think actually, unfortunately, for people who've got, my job title is executive editor. It might be a little bit true unless we as editors learn how to shape these algorithms and where and how to maintain control of the training and where and how to short circuit them where they shouldn't be allowed to do what they do. And that's really what I'm trying to make happen at the BBC. And I think that needs to happen more widely in our industry, and to say, okay, how do we create quality products and make sure that people can know where to find them, and not just the creators of those products, but the kind of maintainers of platforms and the regulators need to have an eye on that and say, okay, how can we make sure that we get to a good place with this?
We hope you're enjoying this APCO Worldwide production. To find out more of what we do in the communication space, head to apcoworldwide.com and see how we are helping firms build back stronger.
Welcome back to Comms Life. We are here with Mukul Devichand, Executive Editor of Voice and AI for the BBC. Mukul, thanks for sticking around. Fascinating conversation so far on the role and responsibilities of AI in the communications and media landscape. But for our final segment, we want to get to know you a little bit better. So I just have a few questions that may do that. Are you happy for these to be fired over your way?
Yeah, sure. Let's see how I do.
That was almost resignation before we've started. It might not happen. It might not happen. Okay, here we go. Your earliest childhood memory?
I remember my first, so I grew up I'm from an Indian family, grew up in South Wales, where there weren't so many Indians at that time. So I remember my first day at school being quite a testing experience. Some of it because of, all the same stuff that everybody has. I remember walking the school building and, being a bit overwhelmed. And I also remember that we had some bread and some meat in the school dinner, and I picked it up like a roti, and kind of tried to eat it like that. And nobody had I just hadn't computed that that's not how everybody else was going to eat. And that caused some real amusement, I think. It was a bit weird because I was, oh, right, you better use a knife and fork, are you? So that was my early memories.
If you were not in media, you would be?
I think I'd be probably doing anything where I got to travel the world, and possibly with a bit more time to think about it than we get when we're doing journalistic assignments.
One work of art, piece of art, that you would suggest everyone experiences, whether they read it, see it, listen to it, what would it be?
So lockdown has been, long and intense, certainly where I am. And I discovered a track by Yusuf Islam, formerly known as Cat Stevens, called The Wind, a very simple track. I think he wrote it like soon after he'd converted to Islam. But it's not really about that, but it's sort of just about calming down. And I must admit, that's been on repeat for me through the lockdown. So that's a great little track for any time you're feeling a bit stressed out.
Excellent. Your perfect escape.
Well, look, I grew up in the hills, and my family come from the mountains in the Himalayas in India. So anywhere where I'm up in the mountains, everyone, the richest and the poorest, all get a great view. So that's what it's all about.
Mukul Devichand, thank you so much for joining us on Comms Life. Pleasure to talk to you. Great conversation.
Thank you very much, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening to Comms Life. If you like that, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Send us any questions or comments on our Twitter page. And while you're at it, you can subscribe to and download Comms Life on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts from. Stay safe and be well.